When I talk about movies, I jokingly draw a distinction between films and movies. This sentiment is sure to come off as a pretentious art house student's persona, but what I'm getting at is the distinction between story and entertainment. The idea held by both classical writing teachers and pretty much every film auteur in history is that stories are guides for life. Stories express a worldview, and through the journeys of the characters, express what is right and what is wrong. Of course, it won't always be that black and white, but the point is that a good story always holds significant and rich substance for the viewer to reflect on and be changed by. Even my great-grandmother, who was born around the conception of film, was held through her vast troubles in life by the film Dr. Zhivago. I'm told that up until her last days she would hum Lara's theme to keep herself hopeful. I personally have a selection of films that have changed the way I see the world around me and made me change my way of living. There's a conversation online, mostly on Twitter, about the corruption of cinema which triggers most people. I agree with the sentiment that we're currently living through the most pathetic era of cinema in history because the industry's focus is heartless remakes of older films, nostalgia-driven reboots, milking familiar IP, etc. Purely entertainment and escapism, creating a slog of content which can be consumed at a mass rate, which neither challenges nor informs the audience. Now, don't get me wrong. Good stories do entertain you, but bad stories can only entertain you. There's nothing wrong with wanting to go to an attraction or a theme park. These are public events that are enjoyable and worth supporting, but we cannot use those to substitute experiences that grow us. With the sacrifice of story for entertainment, we see in hand the degradation of virtue, intelligence, etc. in the modern man. The state of art throughout history has always reflected the state of humanity. The very reason that I started this YouTube channel was to start the process of leading writers in the direction of this classical form to cause a reformation in the spirit of man. My own writing adheres to classical principles of storytelling that ensure the story is both entertaining and a proper guide for life. I know that was a long-winded intro, but that set the stage for us to talk about the differences between the 1930 and 2022 versions of All Quiet on the Western Front. This is a story set during the First World War and follows a German youth who eagerly enters the war, only to find his enthusiasm wane as he gets a first-hand view of the horror. The original version of this, which came out in 1930, won Best Picture and Best Director in its year, while also being nominated for writing and cinematography. It's one of the most influential anti-war films ever made, which is very interesting to think about when we take in its opening epigraph, reading as follows. This is to be neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure, for death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will simply try to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped shells, were destroyed by the war. The film covers its back with this statement due to the sure sensitivity of the subject matter in 1930. It does not wish to romanticize the war. This piece should not be considered a piece of entertainment. For these statements, the film itself and its impact seem to somewhat contradict this idea because it holds a clear opinion about what took place and it impacted many, many lives. On top of that, I hold the opinion that when viewed as an objective piece of storytelling, it's significantly more entertaining than the 2022 version on an adventurous level because it has a stronger structure and design. The 2022 version does not contain the same epigraph, it just hops into the movie. I think this is an indicator that the original was aware of just how much it had to say and the power that a story can hold. This new adaptation is still strong in many ways, but I think its messages are hampered. If someone wants the purest, most impactful version of the story, I recommend the 1930 version of All Quiet on the Western Front. Here is why. Spoilers for both the 1930 and 2022 version of the film. Structure. The themes in All Quiet on the Western Front are about the dangers of entering war with a nihilistic worldview. Young schoolboys are cast into a world-defining, horrific war before they're even mature enough to know what they believe. The story in the 1930 version explores this depressing reality through its structure by clearly dividing the movie into sections, each based around a different escape for the boys. The escape of tormenting your sergeant, the escape of a warm meal, the escape of spending the night with a French girl, the escape of laying in bed again. These are the sequences that define much of the original film. Most of the iconic moments, like the ripping of the poster, stealing the pig, and chasing the French girls, are present in this new 2022 version, but they are brief moments scattered randomly throughout the film rather than clear divisions of interest for the boys. I personally love when a film feels like a journey, and I think that a clear locale and interest division for the boys creates a stronger sense of journey, which makes it more memorable to me. The other side to structure is that the themes are better supported in the original. Both versions explore the unclenching grip of war in light of nihilism, but the new one lets off the pedal while the original doubles down on it. Let's look at this. In the original, we exclusively follow these boys. We see them turn from enthusiastic recruits to haunted wanderers who would rather be out in the battlefield than back home, because nothing makes sense any longer and nothing can be as it once was. The boys never have a sense of who they are fighting for and what it even matters in the original. There are entire conversations about the clear misunderstanding of circumstance. For all of this, our protagonist dies to a bullet as he tries to catch a moth for his own amusement. But in the new one, we strip out this element of confusion and replace it with a new subplot about the general signing the papers necessary to resolve the war. By the end of the story, the boys still die, but in light of the war having just been won. To me, this takes away a lot of the lessons in the film. This doesn't warn you as clearly to be sure about your beliefs in light of war so that you can put motivation behind your rifle. This story was never about the context of who won the war, if it was successful or not. It was all about the impact that it had on the boys' lives. The Professor. In the 1930 version, the schoolboys are pressured into joining the war by their school professor who fabricates stories of the heroism, romanticism, and honor found on the battlefield. The boys are tricked by him, and later in the film, our protagonist comes back home and meets the professor again, only to demean him in front of his class for the lies that he spreads. This entire thread is just gone from the new version, and I think that it's a pretty essential part of the story because it sets up how clearly naive and innocent the boys are when they go in, giving motivation to their nihilism and desire for escape. Side character definition. The purpose that the side characters hold are mostly the same between both of these versions, but there's a distinct persona to each character that's lost in this new one. Cat, for instance, is all about gathering food in the original. He still steals and cooks food in the new one, but he ends up blending into the crowd a little more and the escape feels less defined because it's not highlighted as strongly. We have very distinct characters and functions in the original. Cat, the food stealer. The professor, the one who peer pressures them. Himmelstas, the sergeant who fails to rally the boys into submission, etc. I prefer the definition in these characters personally because they help define the themes of the story, and when you know them better, even for their quirks, their deaths mean more. The Crater. Arguably the most iconic scene in either version of the story is when Paul finds himself in the crater with an enemy soldier that he stabs to death, only to be mortified when he realizes that this man had a wife and child. In the 1930 version, this is an incredibly powerful scene, and the first time that Paul has ever killed a man. This signifies the loss of his innocence and a violent thrust into a depressing maturity. The scene still functions the same in the remake, but here, a lot of the impact of the scene is just stripped away because Paul has already killed multiple soldiers by this point in the story, and didn't seem to care. To give it some credit though, it still works to an extent because the previous kills were all at a distance with his rifle, but here he has to intimately stab the man to death. Still though, this is another decision that weakens the moment compared to the original. Presentation and effects. To end on a more positive note for this 2022 version, I would say that it upholds some pretty special presentation. The 1930 version has pretty amazing presentation and mind-blowing special effects for the time. The mobility of the shots, the realism of the war, and the practical effects captured breathtaking moments in the original. I was really worried about the presentation of this new one going into it because such a high bar was set previously, but in its own way, the stylistic choices and cinematography hold their own. I was pretty impressed. For as much as I've said that the 2022 version is worse, it's still a pretty solid war movie on all external metrics, and one I would recommend checking out. It's much better helmed than the majority of recent war films. If we're going to be asking whether these films fall into the story or entertainment department, the 1930 version is certainly in the story department. But for the 2022 version, I would say that it falls just short and lands more at the entertainment bar. You can still take things out of this movie, don't get me wrong, but it's nowhere near as impactful as the original, which I highly recommend. My hope for this video is that going forward, you'll be able to be more aware about whether a film is teaching you something, providing a guide for life, challenging your beliefs in some way, or if it is merely entertainment. I would encourage you to seek out and support the former. The last video that I made was a Black Panther 2 Wakanda Forever video, and it was a really challenging video for me to make. I had already promised it, so I was going to do it either way, but this channel for me is centered around growing us as writers and trying to be the best writers we can, signaling back to these classical virtues. But when I watched that movie, it's just an absolute nothing burger. Like, it doesn't really give me anything to bite onto. So I don't know what the value of covering those movies are, even if they're mainstream, because if I go in there, all I'm going to be doing is complaining. So from this point forward, I don't know that I can actually promise covering more mainstream superhero movies and things like that, unless there's one that just really stands out. It's I just feel like that content isn't really valuable anymore, and I want you to understand that if you're here at my channel, this is what I'm working towards. This is my identity. This is my goal. I just wanted to say that, and I hope y'all are here to come along with me. Thanks for watching the video, guys. I know that I've been gone for a while. I got a bad case of the flu and I wasn't really able to work while I was sick, but it did give me some time to watch a bunch of new releases, so I have a lot in the pipeline. To continue this conversation on the distinction between stories and entertainment, I'll be talking about the 2 versions of Pinocchio that came out this year. If you enjoyed the video or found it informative, leave it a like and subscribe for more screenwriting content. If you thought it could have been better though, give it a thumbs down and leave me some constructive criticisms in the comments below. Thanks guys, I'll see you later.